So with Moana 2, I of course am going to review Moana, but I also want to review the Tangled animated series. And the reason why is it gave me an excuse to watch this show in its entirety, which I never done before. I watched enough of the show to kind of get a consensus, but I never really watched the show from beginning to end. And I did this, and I'm so glad I did. But the reason I did this for this topic is that Moana was originally was originally supposed to be a Disney Plus series, and I kind of wanted to review this show that to maybe show that while you're right to be worried that this film was being moved and pushed to theaters late into its production to be a theatrical release, it doesn't necessarily make it mean it will be bad, because Tangled the animated series is an incredible show, and yeah. So I just want to talk about that. Also, I just love this show, guys. I really just want to talk about it. So, if you don't know, basically this show is 3 seasons long. It had a TV pilot and had a pretty short run of just 68 episodes plus a movie. So, 70 episodes. That's more than I would say a lot of shows get nowadays. But still, it's a really good show. And I think what's really clever about this show is that essentially they can't make a sequel to Tangled, right? Because Tangled, the movie, is one of the most expensive animated movies ever made. It's one of the most expensive movies ever made because of the way that they have to animate Rapunzel's hair with that CGI. And so while the movie made money, like it made $500 million, it didn't make enough for them to ever want to make a sequel, and then it would just cost too much. So there's no cost-effective reasoning to ever make a Tangled, right? Too, I'm sure we'll probably get a live-action remake and some of that dumbass bullshit. But, so they take this show, and they make it 2D, and that's our sequel. But they also can't ignore the fact that Rapunzel gets married. And that would be a really lame story for your kids to sit with this married couple. I'm sure with clever enough writers they can make it work, but I think this show is obviously going to primarily target kids. It aired on the Disney Channel, right? It was always going to do that, so you're not going to get kids really interested in this married couple being our main character. So they find a really great way to make it so Rapunzel gets her hair back, because she has to do that to sell dolls, and so it's easier for kids to recognize her. And they weave it into a really excellently, really well told story throughout 3 seasons that is just really well done. It definitely has its problems, but at the start of this show, I am going to talk some spoilers, I'll warn you. But I'm just going to talk about the setup, not spoilers. Basically, the start of this show, Rapunzel gets her hair back by touching these black magic rocks, and Eugene proposes to Rapunzel, and she kind of rejects him because she's finally free for the first time in her life. She's not ready to settle down yet, right? And so that's kind of the basis with this show, is that mystery with the black rocks. And Rapunzel and Eugene kind of are figuring out when is she going to be ready to settle down with him, sort of thing. And the way they weave all that together is really clever. And because of course Rapunzel wouldn't want to get married at this point in her life. It's a really well written character dilemma for Flynn, who's been all over the world. He's been so many different places, mostly because he's been on the run. He's ready to settle down. But he's also in love with this person who's not ready to settle down because, well, she has been not allowed to see the whole world. She's mostly been kept up in Corona most of the show because of the events of the first season and her dad trying to keep her safe. And then she eventually gets to venture out and decides that she's ready to get married to Flynn. Which, of course, that's going to happen because we already seen that in the short and at the end of the first movie. So it's just a really clever writing choice. And, yeah. But, yeah, now let's do some spoilers. So, I really like all the characters in this show. Even just some of the side characters. A couple of side characters that I find kind of annoying, like random towns characters. But for the most part, everybody really worked in this show. I think but Varian's arc was great. Him having a redemption arc, it came across a little too quickly, but it still worked. Varian was able to really redeem himself and be a really great character. Cass turning evil against Rapunzel, that was a great storyline. But I do think that it was poorly handled in a couple places. I find it weird that Rapunzel, like, it's most of her dealing with the loss of Cass is in the early half of the season is mostly just in the background of episodes. It doesn't feel like it's ever really the main plot. And when it is, I feel like it just wasn't touched upon well enough. And then you have other characters like the guard, Captain of the Guards. This is Cass is his adopted daughter. He I don't know. He goes back to this island and and there's this whole episode about him like wishing a magic daughter because he can't deal with the loss of losing Cass and he wants to start over, and then having to come with the grips that he can't and they have to work to get back Cass. But like to me, like that episode came out of nowhere. It's natural for that character to feel that way. I get why that character felt that way, but it was like, oh well, if you had another episode where they actually went out and looked for Cass, it would have worked better, but it didn't. It felt like after Cass at the beginning of the season 3 turned evil, everyone just kind of ditched her and forgot about her. I mean, there was characters hurt and betrayed, but for the most part, everybody just was like, whatever, until she came back and she's like, I'm gonna be evil now, do some evil shit, and you're like, okay, and then they battle and then they make up, and it's like, okay. I felt like that was the worst part of the show, was kind of those aspects. Also, I really hated everything on the island. I thought like all those episodes were just utterly garbage. I just think that like these weird people on this island, like leaf looking people, I didn't feel like they were interesting characters. I didn't feel like their stories were interesting in any form. I thought the writing there was just the weakest of the show. I also just really could not stand any episode we had majorly focusing on Max or Pascal. There is no reason those characters needed long drawn out episodes. You could skip those episodes. They're really boring. These are animals. When you have a story that's as grandiose and epic and has all this world building, why the fuck do I need to see an episode about Pascal wanting attention from Rapunzel? Like, no. I don't. I think episodes like that were probably mandated by Disney, because I imagine that the biggest problem with this show is that sometimes they've had too many one-off, like, not story-related episodes. And some of those were entertaining, good episodes that did some world building and had some nice character moments to them. But for the most part, you do really feel like maybe Disney forced those in there, because I imagine this show that they probably made you sell dolls and get little girls to watch. They were cool with them building a story and lore behind it, but they also were like, we need you to limit how much you're doing that. This still needs to be a little kid's show. And so those episodes felt like more message heavy and trying to, like, leave you like with the message like, be yourself, kids, or some shit, And that's fine. It works for what it is. But I don't think that it was the best direction for the show. And that's one thing I really hate about so many modern cartoons. I know these executives do this. That happened with Steven Universe and some other shows. Executives feel like they need to have those filler episodes so they can rerun those episodes. But the fan base of the show, the only episodes they care about are the ones with the plot and the story. And I don't know. I feel like there needs to be a balance of both, but some of these shows are not great at doing a balance. This is one of the better shows at that, but I do think that sometimes some of those episodes were just really weak. I don't really need to have an episode about, like I said, Pascal, the chameleon, or whatever random characters side plot today, sort of thing. I also just want to mention it's really cool that Bruce Campbell voices Flynn's dad in that whole storyline. That's great. And the music of this show is phenomenal. Every piece of music, like every song in this show is really damn good. Like it's on par with the movies, and actually in some ways I think the soundtrack to this show is probably better than the Tangled movies. And last thing I want to mention, the animation of this show is just fucking incredible. Like it's just wonderful animation. Yeah, this is just a great show, guys. For kids, for adults, you know, I definitely think you'll get more out of it if you're a kid because of how many like goofy one-off episodes there are. But the actual story episodes, I mean, the stuff that they're able to do with the storyline about the Dark Kingdom and Casper betraying Rapunzel and all these epic shit and storylines and all that stuff and interesting mysteries and plot threads they're able to weave throughout this show and really make entertaining still. This show is incredible. Let me know your thoughts, like, share, and subscribe.